Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share heartwarming tales that remind us of the power of kindness and second chances. In today's story, a chance encounter between a compassionate man and a woman facing unimaginable challenges transforms not just their lives, but the lives of many others. Stay tuned for this incredible journey. The sharp chill of winter bit through the streets of Chicago, the wind howling its way past towering skyscrapers and bustling avenues. It was early December, and the city had been transformed into a festive wonderland. Twinkling lights adorned lampposts. Storefronts showcased elaborate Christmas displays, and the air carried the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. Ethan Hayes walked briskly, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. A mid-level marketing executive at Summit Innovations. Ethan had spent the last 5 years climbing the corporate ladder. His career was stable, his prospects bright. But lately, he had found himself questioning what it was all for. The long hours, the relentless grind, it all seemed to blur together. Tonight was no different. His briefcase felt heavier than usual, the weight mirroring the fatigue in his chest. As he turned off Michigan Avenue onto a quieter street, Ethan's steps slowed. The usual buzz of the city seemed to fade as he noticed something, or rather, someone sitting on the frozen pavement. A woman, bundled in a worn, oversized coat, sat hunched against the cold. Her cardboard sign read, "Fallen on hard times. Any help appreciated." Her face was pale, her fingers trembling as she clutched the coat tighter around her. Yet, there was something about her presence that caught Ethan's attention. It wasn't just the sign or her tattered appearance. It was her eyes, sharp and clear, filled with a quiet dignity that contrasted starkly with her circumstances. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to do. He had seen countless people in similar situations on his commute, but this felt different. Something about her compelled him to stop. Maybe it was the loneliness of the season, or perhaps it was the way she carried herself despite her hardship. Whatever it was, Ethan found himself standing in front of her, the cold seeping into his gloves as he pulled his hands from his pockets. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, Ethan felt as if she could see right through him. Her face, lined with fatigue and hardship, bore no trace of fear or shame. Instead, there was a quiet strength, as all right as one can be, given the circumstances, she replied, her voice calm but tinged with weariness. "Just trying to get by." Ethan swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. He fumbled for his wallet, pulling out a few bills from his coat pocket. "I don't have much," he said hesitantly. "But here, I hope it helps. Merry Christmas." The woman glanced at the money, then back at him. There was gratitude in her expression, but also something deeper, something that suggested she wasn't used to kindness. "Thank you," she said simply. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he replied, extending a hand. "And yours?" She hesitated briefly before accepting his handshake. Her grip was firm despite her frail appearance. "Grace." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them carried on as usual. Cars honked in the distance. Pedestrians shuffled past, but to Ethan, it felt as if time had paused. He couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was significant, though he couldn't explain why. "What happened?" he asked gently, nodding toward her sign. "How did you end up here?" Grace sighed, her eyes drifting to the street. "Life," she said after a moment. "It has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? I had a good life once, family, career, the works, but one thing led to another. And here I am." Ethan nodded, sensing her reluctance to dive into the details. He didn't press her. "It must be tough," he said instead, his voice sincere. Grace gave a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It is," she admitted, "but I'm not looking for handouts. I just need a chance to start over." Her words struck a chord with Ethan. He had spent years in the corporate world, surrounded by people who measured success in promotions and paychecks. But here was someone who had lost everything, yet still carried a spark of determination. The contrast was humbling. "Actually," Ethan said, an idea forming in his mind, "there might be something I can do." Grace raised an eyebrow, skepticism flickering across her face. Oh, Ethan hesitated, wondering if what he was about to suggest was ridiculous. My company, Summit Innovations, is hosting its annual Christmas party next week. It's a formal event, and employees are allowed to bring a guest. I thought, maybe you'd like to come? Grace stared at him, clearly taken aback. You're inviting me, a homeless woman, to a corporate party? Ethan chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. I know it sounds crazy, he admitted, but I think it could be good for you. You get a nice meal, meet some people, maybe even make a connection or two. Grace studied him, her expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? Ethan? You don't even know me. Ethan paused, the question catching him off guard. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe it's because I believe everyone deserves a chance. Or maybe I'm just tired of walking past people like you and pretending I don't see them. Grace's lips curved into a faint smile, her skepticism softening. All right, she said after a long pause. I'll go, but on one condition. Ethan blinked. What's that? If I do this, Grace said firmly, I want the chance to repay your kindness someday. I don't know how, but I will. Ethan smiled, extending his hand once more. Deal. As they shook hands, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than either of them could have anticipated. He didn't know what the future held for Grace or for himself, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. A transformation begins. The days leading up to the Summit Innovations Christmas party passed in a flurry of preparation. Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his spontaneous invitation had set something larger into motion. But he also couldn't deny that he felt good about it. Grace had agreed, albeit cautiously, and now it was up to him to make sure she was ready for the event. On Saturday morning, Ethan arrived at the Fresh Start Boutique, a quaint clothing store tucked away in one of Chicago's quieter neighborhoods. The shop was warm and welcoming, with racks of elegant dresses and suits lining the walls. It was the kind of place where new beginnings seemed possible, a fitting name, he thought. Grace stood outside when he arrived, bundled in the same worn coat she had been wearing when they met. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan waved, offering her a reassuring smile. Ready, he asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Grace replied, though her tone betrayed a hint of nervousness. The shop's clerk greeted them warmly, her keen eye instantly assessing Grace's situation without a word. Ethan explained the purpose of their visit, and the clerk nodded enthusiastically, diving into the racks to find the perfect outfit. As Grace browsed through the dresses, Ethan couldn't help but watch her. She moved with a quiet deliberation, her fingers brushing over fabrics she hadn't touched in years. There was a hesitance in her movements, as if she were afraid to let herself hope for too much. Finally, she stepped into the fitting room with a simple black dress the clerk had suggested, a timeless, understated piece that seemed to suit her perfectly. Ethan waited outside, his foot tapping against the floor as he tried to suppress his nerves. What if this was too much for her? What if she felt out of place? The door creaked open, and Grace stepped out. Ethan froze. The transformation was remarkable. The dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her natural elegance. Her shoulders, once hunched from the weight of the cold and hardship, were now pulled back with a quiet confidence. Her hair, still untamed, framed her face in a way that seemed almost intentional. Well, Grace asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. You look amazing, Ethan said, struggling to find the right words. I mean, really, just incredible. Grace gave a small, uncertain smile as she turned to the mirror. For a moment, she seemed to forget about Ethan entirely. Her gaze fixed on her reflection. He watched as something shifted in her expression, a flicker of the person she had once been. Perhaps, or the person she was becoming again. It's been a long time since I've seen myself like this, she said softly. There was no bitterness in her tone, only quiet reflection. Ethan cleared his throat, sensing the weight of the moment. I think you're going to fit right in at that party, he said, his voice light. In fact, You'll probably outshine half the people there." Grace laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she said, though her smile lingered. Later that day, Ethan took Grace to a small salon he had found online. The stylist, a cheerful woman named Elena, immediately set to work, her chatter filling the room as she washed, trimmed, and styled Grace's hair. Ethan sat in the corner, scrolling through his phone but stealing glances at Grace every few minutes. He was struck by how natural this all felt, as if helping her was the most obvious thing in the world. When Elena spun Grace around to face the mirror, Ethan felt his breath catch. The transformation was complete. Grace's hair was styled into an elegant updo, soft waves framing her face. For the first time, she looked like someone who belonged at a corporate gala, not someone who had been fighting to survive on the streets. Grace studied her reflection in silence before turning to Ethan. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Ethan replied. "Just show up at that party and be yourself. That's more than enough." Grace nodded, though there was still a hint of doubt in her eyes. "It's been so long since I've been in a place like that," she admitted. "I'm not sure I'll remember how to act." "You'll do fine," Ethan said, his tone firm. "Trust me. Just be honest, be kind, and let people see the real you. That's all that matters." The night of the party arrived, and Ethan found himself more nervous than he'd anticipated. He had told himself this was about giving Grace a chance, but as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change him too. Grace met him in the lobby of the Chicago Skyline Ballroom, the venue for Summit Innovation's annual gala. She wore the black dress they had chosen, paired with simple yet elegant jewelry Elena had lent her. When she stepped into the warm glow of the lobby lights, Ethan's colleagues turned to stare. "Wow," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You look incredible." Grace smiled, a mixture of gratitude and nerves in her expression. "Thanks. I hope I don't embarrass you." "You could never embarrass me," Ethan said, offering his arm. "Come on, let's do this." They walked into the ballroom together, the grand space filled with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. The room was a swirl of glittering dresses, tailored suits, and elaborate holiday decorations. Ethan felt a pang of anxiety as curious eyes turned toward them. But Grace held her head high, her confidence unshaken. Introductions followed quickly. Ethan guided Grace through the crowd, introducing her to colleagues and clients. To his relief, Grace handled each interaction with ease. Her natural charm and sincerity disarmed even the most skeptical guests. And it wasn't long before she was deep in conversation with people Ethan had struggled to connect with for years. By the time the evening wound down, Ethan couldn't help but feel proud. Grace had not only held her own, but had left an impression on everyone she met. As they left the ballroom, stepping into the cold Chicago night, Ethan turned to her. "You were amazing tonight," he said. "I mean it. You were the highlight of the evening." Grace smiled, though her eyes were thoughtful. "It felt good," she admitted, "to be seen again, to feel like I could belong somewhere." "You do belong," Ethan said firmly, "and this is just the beginning." Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're right," she said softly, as they walked through the quiet streets, the city lights casting a warm glow around them. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. For Grace, the night had been a step toward reclaiming her life. For Ethan, it was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most unexpected transformations. A night to remember. The following week brought a renewed sense of purpose for both Ethan and Grace. The Summit Innovations Christmas party had been a transformative experience, not just for Grace, who had stepped out of the shadows of her hardships, but for Ethan, who was beginning to see life through a lens far removed from the corporate grind. Word of Grace's presence at the gala spread quickly through Summit Innovations. Whispers of admiration and curiosity filled the office corridors. Ethan, initially apprehensive about how his colleagues might react, found himself overwhelmed by the positive feedback. Ethan, Rachel, one of his colleagues, said as she approached him at the coffee station, "Your date from the party, Grace, right? She was incredible. Where did you find her?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before deciding to be honest. "She's someone I met on the street. She was going through a tough time, and I thought she deserved a chance." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise, but quickly softened. "Wow, that's inspiring. You know, it's rare to see someone go out of their way like that." She seemed so confident, so poised. Ethan smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "She is. I think she just needed someone to believe in her." A second chance. The connection between Ethan and Grace deepened in the days that followed. Ethan helped Grace secure temporary housing through a local program, and she, in turn, began taking steps to rebuild her life. With Ethan's encouragement, Grace revisited her background in finance, a career she had once thrived in before life had unraveled. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet cafe near Millennium Park, Grace shared more of her story. "I wasn't always like this," she began, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I had a career, a family, and dreams. But when my husband passed away unexpectedly, everything fell apart. Grief consumed me, and I made mistakes that cost me my job, my home, and eventually my confidence." Ethan listened intently, his heart aching at the weight of her words. "You've been through so much," he said gently, "but you're still here. That says a lot about your strength." Grace smiled faintly. "Sometimes, survival feels like the only choice. But meeting you, it reminded me that there's more to life than just getting by. There's still hope." Ethan reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "There's always hope, Grace, and you're going to do amazing things. I can feel it." As the new year approached, Summit Innovations announced an internal initiative to expand its corporate social responsibility program. The CEO, James Carter, called a company-wide meeting to discuss the plan. Standing at the head of the sleek conference room, James addressed the team. "We've always been innovators in technology," he began, his voice steady and authoritative. "But innovation isn't just about products. It's about people. Starting this year, we're launching a division dedicated to community outreach and social impact. And I've decided to appoint someone to lead this effort, someone who embodies the values we're striving for." The room buzzed with anticipation as James turned his gaze to Ethan. "Ethan Hayes, you've shown remarkable leadership and compassion. Your actions have reminded us all of the power of empathy. I'd like you to take charge of this new division." Ethan froze, his mind racing. The opportunity was beyond anything he had ever imagined. As the room erupted in applause, his eyes met Grace's, who had joined the meeting as a guest. Her smile was radiant, filled with pride and encouragement. After the meeting, James approached Ethan and Grace. "Grace," he said warmly, "your story and resilience are nothing short of inspiring. Ethan has spoken highly of you, and I'd like to offer you a role in our new program. With your background in finance, I think you could make a real impact." Grace's breath caught, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," James replied with a smile. "This is your second chance. Take it." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Over the next few months, Ethan and Grace worked tirelessly to establish Summit Innovations' new outreach division. They developed programs that provided job training, financial literacy workshops, and mentorship opportunities for those in need. Grace's firsthand experience gave her a unique perspective, making the initiatives both practical and deeply compassionate. The impact was immediate and profound. Stories of transformation poured in. Individuals who had been struggling now found themselves empowered and hopeful. Ethan and Grace became a dynamic duo, their partnership fueled by mutual respect and a shared vision for change. One evening, as they wrapped up a successful event at a local community center, Grace turned to Ethan. "You know," she said softly, None of this would have happened if you hadn't stopped to talk to me that night. Ethan smiled, his gaze steady. And none of it would have happened if you hadn't had the courage to say yes. This isn't just my doing, Grace. It's ours. Grace looked out of the crowd, people laughing, connecting, and rebuilding their lives. It's incredible, she said. To think that something so small, a conversation, could lead to all of this. It's the ripple effect. Ethan replied, one small act of kindness can change everything. A new beginning, as spring blossomed in Chicago. Ethan and Grace stood on the rooftop of the Summit Innovations building, gazing out at the city skyline. The journey that had brought them here felt like a lifetime ago. Yet it was only the beginning of something far greater. Do you ever think about how far we've come? Grace asked, her voice filled with wonder. All the time, Ethan replied, and I can't wait to see where we go next. Grace turned to him, her expression soft. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Ethan smiled, his heart full. Thank you, Grace. You've taught me more than I could ever teach you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan and Grace stood side by side, ready to embrace the future. Together, they had proven that hope, compassion, and second chances could change the world, one life at a time. Thank you for joining us on this inspiring journey of hope and redemption. Grace and Ethan's story proves that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple out to create monumental change. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more uplifting tales. Let us know where you're watching from and your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, every act of compassion has the power to change a life and the world. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing in second chances.